In this lesson, we're going to unpack the ragtime blues chord progression. Let's get to it. Hey there, John here with the Blues Guitar Institute, and this is your Tuesday Blues, where every week we cover a cool blues lesson. Today what we're going to do is talk about the ragtime chord progression. Now there are definitely many variations and a lot of different directions that you could go with ragtime chord progressions, but what we're going to do today is focus on one that is a staple. Think about tunes like Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie, or They're Red Hot by Robert Johnson, or Truckin' My Blues Away by the great Blind Boy Fuller. All of these have very similar chord progressions that are rooted in what we're going to talk about today. This chord progression can be a bit confusing if you've got a really good working knowledge of diatonic chord theory. We're going to play this progression in the key of C. So C is going to be our one chord, the tonic, the chord that we're kind of driving to, that once we hit it, it feels like we've arrived, like we're home, okay? So what we're going to do is just get a feel for this progression and just strum through the chords. We're starting out with a C, that one chord, there we go, and then an A7, then a D7, then a G7, and then finally back home. Okay. Now, if you're familiar with diatonic chord theory, or in short, what chords fit in a key, you've probably noticed some issues, maybe some things confusing you in that chord progression, which then makes you think, well, why does it even sound good? Because in the key of C, I know that my A should be minor, right? Those sound really good together. Okay, why do we then change and not go to A minor, but we go to A7? Why does that work in the context of this progression? Then we can ask the same question of this D7. D is the 2 chord of C, and so it should be minor. And then finally, our 5 chord, G7, well, that actually works. This is in the key of C, because C's 5 chord, C, D, E, F, G, should be dominant. It should have that flat 7, in this case the F note, that pulls us home. Now I want to talk about this really quick. So we're kind of skipping ahead to the end of the progression, which will hopefully help us make sense of the beginning of it. This move from G7 to C sounds really good. There is a very strong relationship between the 5 chord, especially when you play the dominant 7 version of it, back to the 1 chord. There's a couple of reasons for that. We've got this F that wants to resolve down to the E, which happens. Just pay attention to the first string here when we move from this G7 to a C. So we moved from F, which is the 4, down to E, which is the 3rd, okay? Then there's another move that happens where we're moving from the B under this G7 chord up. So we've got these 2 notes that really want to go somewhere. They want to resolve to another note that they're right next to. And that's what makes this a really pleasing move. Let's just listen to these 2 tones. Those 2 notes moving, one down and one up, by a semitone or a half step or 1 fret on the guitar, if you want to think of it like that, really creates this nice resolution back to the 1 chord. So that really just explains the 1 chord that already worked, the G7, into C. How do we use that information to help us explain how we got there? We took a tour through A7, which doesn't make sense, should really be A minor in the key of C, and then also D7, which should be D minor in the key of C. Well, we need to start at the end, at this C, and work backwards. So we talked about how there's a really strong relationship from the 5 chord, the dominant chord, back to the 1. Well, what if we temporarily think about this chord, this G7 or G, and think about what the 5th of this chord is? It's going to be out of the key of C, but we're going to step outside for just a second. And if you follow up the G major scale, you'll find that D should be the 5th of G. And if we make that a dominant 7, we've got a really strong resolution there. So instead of moving from D7 into G major, which you can do within the context of this progression, if you hold it and really emphasize the G7 here, it drives some tension toward our home chord, our 1 chord, the tonic C major in this case. So we kind of hold on to that dominant 7 sound, and we really kind of push off the resolution from D7 to G and then to C. We push it off because we want to have that dominant 7 sound headed into the C major chord. So we can hold our dominant 7, and then resolve to the tonic. All right, before we go any further, I got a quick question for you. I want to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what your favorite ragtime blues tune is. I've got mine and I'll share it with you, but I want to hear from you down below. Now, if we back this up a little bit, we know that we want to get into the D7. So what's the 5 chord of D? Well, if we start here at D and just count up the D major scale, we're going to land on A. So we need to play an A7. Remember, the 5 chord can be dominant 7. So we're going to have this A7 chord and move into our D7 chord with that in mind, okay? Now, same as before, if you follow this out, you would really want that to be a D major chord, but we want to delay the resolution here, so we're going to choose to play another dominant 7 chord, again out of the key, but that to me builds this really nice anticipation and tension through the progression until you get to your 1 chord. All right, so going backwards, we've worked from our C to G, the 5 of C, to D7, the 5 of G, to A7, the 5 of D, and then from here we just simply started at our C major. From time to time, you'll hear the ragtime progression carry this even further and actually start out on an E7, because E is the 5th of A, right? A, B, C sharp, D, E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, but that's not in our example, but I wanted to let you know that you can keep going. And you really just chain these 5ths together to produce a really cool sound. And remember, play the dominant 7 version of the chord, and that kind of pushes off the resolution until you get fully to your C chord. Now, premium members will have access to the tab for that fingerpicking piece, including the interactive tab player so that you can follow along, slow it down, loop different parts, and all of that good stuff. But I hope that this really helps you make sense of why these chords really work together. Once you really understand the concept at play here, changing the key becomes pretty easy. With some practice, of course. You just start with your target chord with the end in mind and then work backwards, finding the 5 chord that would lead you into that target chord. And of course, you move the target chord as you move backwards through the progression. Remember, keep the end in mind here. If you want to really get started building your fundamental skills in fingerpicking, then pick up the 5 essential fingerpicking exercises guide that I've got for you. It's a download for free, and it really gets to work on the core fundamental movements that will help make you a better finger picker. Be sure to comment below, let me know your favorite ragtime blues tune, hit the like button if you dig this, and then consider hitting the subscribe button to come on back every Tuesday for another acoustic blues lesson. Until then, practice smart and play on.